Well, hey there. Great to see you again. Kevin here, coming to you live from the sanctuary. Well, not live while you're seeing this, obviously, but live while I'm doing this here on what day is it? Tuesday today. It's Tuesday morning. Coming to you from the sanctuary. And you'll notice it looks a little different if you haven't been here on Thursday this past week. We've set up the sanctuary a little bit differently for our worship times on Thursdays at 7:30, which of course you're all invited to come to. A little bit more of a circular feel, a little bit more of an intimate feel. We're sharing stories about the ways that God has been at work. We're participating together as we sing with a songbook, a worship songbook. If you're not able to join us, you can see the songs that we're singing. There's a link on our website where you can see what songs we'll be worshiping with over the course of the summer. And we're inviting you to come, bring something, bring a story or a lesson or a revelation as we share together, as we pray together. I'd love to see you there. Or come on a Tuesday or a Saturday, Tuesday night at 7 or a Saturday evening at 10. Come into this space to worship, to pray, to seek God wholeheartedly with people who will be here facilitating those times. So, sharing stories. We're sharing devotionals, sharing things to encourage one another here with these videos. I'm fascinated by butterflies. I don't know about you, but they just captivate me when I see them. I love going to the Leaf. We've got memberships at the Leaf. Love going there and up to the butterfly gardens and just sitting, watching the butterflies. Hoping like one will land on our shoulder, or just looking at just the beauty of the ways that God has created these incredible creatures, from a caterpillar to a butterfly, and looking at just their magnificence in terms of diversity and patterning on their wings and the ways that they're able to get lift and fly. They're just incredible. And so the other day I was sitting in my screen porch. We have a screen room where we kind of have a little bit of a couch, and we have some screens on the bottom level, and then there's some windows on the top above some 4x4 posts. And I noticed there was a butterfly inside our screen room, but it was just kind of had its wing closed, and it was just sort of sitting there. And as I looked closer, as I went to investigate, I noticed that the butterfly was kind of a little bit entangled in a spider web, in a cobweb. And so I kind of freed it. I moved the spider web away, and then just tried to not touch the butterfly, and I just left it alone. And so I kind of went away. It was fine, or I thought it was fine. Hoped that it'd start to fly. I wasn't sure how I was going to get out. A little bit foolish on my part. But came back to it a little bit later and noticed the butterfly was just like splat. It was like on the ground, just like right below it, just fallen down. So I guess it had tried to fly and then bloop, just couldn't make it any further than that. So something was clearly off with this butterfly. So I kind of nudged it. Well, first I thought it was dead. I kind of nudged it, and then it flapped its wings a bit. It's like, okay, this is awesome. The butterfly is still alive, struggling, but alive. And so I kind of slid a piece of paper underneath this butterfly and carried it over to our table that's in the porch, and just kind of let it be there, and left it alone for a bit. Came back and noticed that the butterfly had tried to move, and it had flapped its way to then fall again onto the ground. And so I thought, oh, this is not good. Like, is it struggling? Like, what's really going on with this thing? So I had to go and prepare some dinner. Tony and Tracy and I ended up having dinner together, and we're thinking, what do we do with this butterfly? And so we Googled it, of course, as any caring, I don't know, any person does when they don't know what to do with things these days. You go and search Google, right? And so we found that we can rehabilitate a butterfly by putting some sugar water into a sponge and then just laying the butterfly onto the sponge. And so we did that. And so we kind of just left it alone. And the butterfly did try to move, and it would just sort of flop off the sponge. So we kind of then thought, well, maybe it needs a natural habitat. So we foolishly kind of got a leaf, and we put it over top and tried to rest this leaf over top of the butterfly. And then we didn't really know what was going to happen. So we kind of left it there, and the butterfly eventually kind of flopped to the side and was off to the side of the sponge. But then we noticed that, I don't know if you know, like, butterflies use like a straw-like thing from their mouth called a proboscis. And it was kind of like, it looked like the proboscis was like going into the sponge. So I thought, oh, maybe there's something there. Like, maybe this butterfly is actually doing something. And so we kind of just left it alone. But some of us were sort of saying, you know what, this is crazy. Like the butterfly is clearly, it's clearly like struggling. We should just put it out of its misery. We should just euthanize it and be done with it. And others of us at the table are like, no, no, we're going to leave it alone for a bit of time and we're going to see what happens. And so it seemed kind of foolish to some of us in terms of what we were doing, but we thought, okay, we're going to give it a shot anyway. And it reminds me, this whole thing about this idea of using our own wisdom versus using Google and using it, are we being foolish in what we're doing? It reminded me of what I've been reading in 1 Corinthians about Paul in terms of him speaking to the church, leading the church, sending a letter to the church, an encouragement to the church. He basically was writing to the church because the church had fallen into some tough times. They were being disunified. They were disunified because of some of the leaders that were there, Apollos and Peter and Paul and then Jesus too. The church wasn't sure who to follow. There was lots of people coming into the church because of the multi-ethnic nature of the way that Corinth was. Corinth was like the modern day, like Vegas, New York, and Los Angeles all wrapped into one. Lots going on, lots of people, lots of transients and people coming and going because of the nature of the fact that it was a port city. And so you had different people, different voices, different things going on in the life of the church. And so the people there were then struggling to know what it was that they were supposed to do in terms of being Christ followers. And so Paul is basically writing to them saying, you know, your disunity is, there's something significant here, and we need to speak about this. I need to speak to you about this. We need to work on this, in addition to other things that were going on in 1 Corinthians that Paul talks about in terms of their ideas around sexuality, and their ideas around marriage, and their ideas around worship, and then the ideas about the resurrection. And so Paul, in this, just in verse or chapter 1, is talking to them then about God's wisdom. And he goes on to say in 1 Corinthians 18, he says, the message of the cross is foolish to those who are headed for destruction. But we who are being saved know it is the very power of God. As the scripture says, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and discard the intelligence of the intelligent. Paul was quoting from Isaiah chapter 29 here, and he's to emphasize that basically God's way of thinking is far beyond any of the ways that we think. We are foolish to think that we might even be able to think in the ways of God. It's not like the world's way. It's not like human wisdom, because God offers us so much more. And then Paul goes on to say, so where does this leave the philosophers, the scholars, and the world's brilliant debaters? God's made the wisdom of this world look foolish. Since God in his wisdom saw to it that the world would never know him through human wisdom, he has used our foolish preaching to save those who believe. It's foolish to the Jews who look for signs from heaven. It's foolish to the Greeks who seek human wisdom. So when we preach that Christ was crucified, the Jews are offended and the Gentiles say it's all nonsense. So Paul is saying here, like, even the Jews think that the wisdom of Christ is foolish because the Jews were looking for a conqueror. They were looking for someone who they had sort of preconceived notion of in terms of who the Messiah, who was going to come and save them, a conquering Messiah based on the scriptures that they were reading. And the Jews wouldn't have believed that a criminal who was then killed on a cross, put on a cross and then killed, could possibly be the Messiah. And he's saying here about the Greeks. The Greeks were like all about philosophy and intellectualism. And he's saying here that the Greeks basically, they think this whole thing is foolish because essentially they didn't see any of the powerful characteristics of what they would have seen in their own thinking or in the gods, their mythological gods that would have seen. It didn't make sense that a suffering servant, somebody or Jesus who would come humbly to give all of himself on the cross, would then be the person to save the world. And so the whole thing seemed just foolish to them. And I guess this whole idea about even Jesus in our time seems foolish to our world and the ways of the world in our context too, right? Our world longs for things of power. We worship power and influence and wealth, and none of those things make sense to the world in terms of, or those things don't make sense in that to give those things up in order to follow Jesus, in order to become to have life and light and freedom as Jesus provides, as Jesus says that he provides. Jesus came as a humble and as a poor servant, and he offers his kingdom to those of us who have faith, to those of you who have faith. You don't have to go out and do a whole bunch of different things, to do a whole bunch of works. He says, remember, dear brothers and sisters, that few of you are wise in the world's eyes or powerful or wealthy when God called you. Instead, God chose the things the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think that they are wise. And he chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring nothing what the world considered important. Sometimes God thinks that things that are that we might think are worthless, God is going to use those in incredible ways. Things that we think might be foolish, God is thinking way beyond that and using way more beyond that we can ever imagine. And so what happened in terms of this butterfly was that we left it for the night, and then in the morning, we kind of looked at it. It was still on its side, but its pospisil, its straw-like mouth thing was still into the edge of the sponge. And so we left it again. And then in that afternoon, when Tracy came home, the butterfly all of a sudden was back up onto the edge of by the window. But then foolishly, it was desperately trying to get out and was flapping its wings and working as hard as it possibly could to try to make its way out. And so we basically kind of got that piece of paper again and kind of just shepherded it over towards the door, opened the door, and it just took off and it flew away. And so my thinking in all of this is that we couldn't imagine that just a little bit of sponge sugar water was going to allow for the strength for the butterfly to regain its strength in order to be able to then take off and fly. But it did. And I guess sometimes I wonder if we think that sometimes like little things that we do, the little things that we do might not have any difference. Like the little things that we do in terms of encouraging somebody else, or the little things that we do that might seem foolish, like I don't know, that are giving away some things that we think are more than we possibly could imagine. Or in my own life, sharing a home with somebody who was living in a car and not really knowing a whole lot about that person, but inviting them in to our home in order to help that person kind of take next steps in their life. Maybe it looks like marching for something in terms of peace. Maybe it looks like having to change your job in order for you to be able to serve and glorify and do something that you feel called to, that God is calling you to do. Whatever it looks like, trust God. Whatever it looks like, God is providing for doing things in ways through the good news of Jesus that we can't even imagine. And so my encouragement to you this week is, what is it going to look like? What is foolish in your eyes that God is going to use in you or through you? What about the ways of Jesus, his humbleness, his ways of teaching, his counterculture aspects in terms of ideas of money or wealth or influence? What does that look like in terms of for you in your life as you engage with your friends, as you engage with family, as you go about these summer months? And so what does it look like to follow Jesus, to humbly be foolish in Christ's eyes? Because God has united you with Jesus. For our benefit, God made him to be wisdom itself. Christ made us right with God. He made us pure and holy and freed us from sin. Boast only about the Lord. May that be so in your life as you navigate your following Jesus. Talk to you next week. Peace.